Welcome to the Evolve, Move, Play podcast, where we bring you the most interesting and enlightening conversations around movement practice and how you can become the most heroic version of yourself through pursuing movement that's relevant to your nature. This is a podcast that's going to feature some of the top movers in the world, some of the most amazing movement thinkers, and people from fields that are related to movement as far afield as evolutionary theory, strength and conditioning, and everything in between. So if you're interested in movement, please stick around. And if you like our work and want to support it, please consider supporting us on Patreon, because this podcast is completely listener supported. We don't want to take any advertising. We don't want to interrupt your experience of watching the show. So what really helps us get the best thinkers on, have the time to put these together, have the best quality for you guys as far as audio and video, is your support. So please consider supporting us and enjoy the rest of the show. Hey, welcome back to the Evolve, Move, Play podcast. Our guest this week is Caitlin Pontrella. Caitlin is the executive director of Parkour Visions, and those who've been following my work for a while will know that I helped co-found Parkour Visions back in 2006 and then starting classes in 2008. So I'm really excited to have Caitlin in town and helping to lead that organization. It's really good to kind of have her bring our expertise in. So prior to coming to Parkour Visions, she helped run a company in New York called the Movement Creative. And the Movement Creative was a parkour teaching organization, but it was a particularly play-focused parkour teaching organization. And Caitlin has an enduring interest in play research. And in addition to that, she is an architect and has a real interesting eye towards design and how it impacts the way that people play with spaces. So one of the reasons that Caitlin wanted to have this chat with me and vice versa was to talk about some of the issues around sex and gender in the parkour community, because it's a community that is predominantly male. So a lot of the beginning of the conversation revolves around that. And then the second half of the conversation is focused on play and design and how that impacts things. So if those topics are interesting to you, I think this is a very enlightening conversation. I was really happy to get Caitlin on the podcast and enjoyed my chance to speak with her. Without further ado, I present Caitlin Pontrella.
I had a student at one of my workshops who had gotten up ahead of the part of the group that I was in. So I came up and she was looking at a jump that was maybe about 7 feet across, from one rock to another over a stream right before it turned into a waterfall. Mm-hmm. And there was another one of the students who's also a teacher who was helping encourage her. So I stepped up and kind of took the other side and was spotting her. And I told her, I didn't want her to feel too much pressure, because she was getting that message, you can do this, which I felt like was a little too much like, maybe you need to do this. So first I told her, you don't have to do this, but I know that you can do it, that this distance is totally doable for you. Mm-hmm. And if you do it, we're here to support you, and we'll make sure you're safe. And so she asked me, can I do it, and can I cry while I'm doing it? And I said, yeah, that's fine. And so she did, and she jumped and she cried, and she was crying and laughing afterwards. And we kind of had this conversation about how, like, that's your process, your process, and it's a beautiful thing, right? If it's
sure, you experience an intense emotion. People process their intense emotions very differently. I mean, this is
and so I found that it's very easy, I think, when you have a certain type of mind to look at someone else's expression of their mental state, and kind of be like, well, that's stupid, or why would you cry? Like, and that's never really helpful.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's really about building empathy in our communities, and the more you can expose people to different kinds of people and their processes, mm-hmm. and have conversation around it, right? I think the biggest thing is like, let's talk about each other's experiences, and also give permission for everyone to have the experience they need to have. Yeah. And that's like stepping outside of gender restrictions or societal expectations of whether or not you can show emotion, whether or not, like, maybe you do need to be supported instead of, like, name mm-hmm. called, but to be able to ask for what you, like she did, ask for what you need to do, and then, like, share that experience as a model to other people as, hey, this person processes it this way. You also, like, here's someone you can identify with.
Yeah.
But there's a lack of dialogue, I think, sometimes in our communities around differences of experience.
Yeah, well, it's a different thing. There's a lot of dialogue about in our culture about kind of what it all means around sex and gender.
Sure.
But it seems like there's a lot of conflict without a lot of like willingness to kind of have empathy, I guess, and to try and it feels like there's a difficult balance between. It seems really useful for me as a coach personally to recognize that women on average have different minds than men, right? That they tend to express themselves differently, they tend to experience things differently, and that having a general heuristic about how a woman might respond helps me engage at the first level with an individual woman. And then once I know her better, I start to recognize, okay, I flesh out the individual, and then it's the fact that she's one gender or another, that actually ceases to matter because you know the individual. But at the first step, having that script.
Having a script to engage with anyone, right, is, having an awareness of stereotypes and generalizations. They exist for a reason because they've existed on some scale or another, right? Yeah. And for so many coaches, I think, we talk about, like, a progressive experience, creating movement for all, and how everyone can take their own path in their practice. That also means that they have their own experience of their practice, emotionally, physically, and don't just practice scaling up and scaling down your physical progressions, but also the way you scale up and scale down, the way you give people permission to have emotional experiences, right? So. Yeah, recognize the spectrum of ability, right? If you allow someone to be a beginner and an advanced athlete, same thing, a beginner and advanced in terms of managing their emotion. I also see people who have very strong emotional reactions as people who are not used to experiencing or practicing working under those emotions very often, which is why parkour is pretty awesome, because you get to have a frequent practice space. And I'm curious, like, if the student of yours, a year or two from now would have such an emotional reaction facing a similar challenge as she becomes more adept at navigating her own kind of emotional response to a circumstance, or to her fear, or to her experience in movement.
She sent me a message and said that, like, she's had, like, she returns to that moment repeatedly because that, like, permission to have her emotional process and to be able to, like, have a positive what's the word I'm looking for? A positive conclusion, anyways. To the experience is really huge. And I had another student. It was really interesting. She sprained her ankle. Okay. She did a year of online training with me. Cool. And then she came to Return to the Source, which is the big seminar of the year, and it costs the most. Mm-hmm. And she sprained her ankle on the second day of the third day. So she's there for a week, and now she, like, can't participate in most of the drills for, like, 2 days. Mm-hmm. And I kept asking her, like, how are you doing? Are you okay? And she's like, oh, I'm fine. And because I didn't want to draw attention to her, I didn't, like, try to dig more deeply into it. So it wasn't until, like, maybe the fourth night that I was able to kind of step aside with her. Like, I found her sitting by herself and sat down next to her and said, okay, how is this going for you? With the sprained ankle? And she was like, I'm fine first. And I was like, it's okay if you're not fine. Like, you spent a lot of money and you've been preparing for this for a year and you've been thinking about it a lot. Yeah. And, like, it's hard to lose out on those experiences and to not be part of the group. And then it was, like, everything came out.
Totally. I think that what you do, like, giving people permission to acknowledge their feelings. Yeah. This is something you can just do with women, but also with men. I'm sure lots of men also feel this, and even more so, where, like, women, if you give them, I think, just for me personally, I have to talk about my experience. If I'm given a little bit of an invitation to share how I feel in a way that's meaningful, I feel like you actually will hear what I have to say and value it. Yeah. I think this is what I was saying a second ago before we were off camera was, I have a lot of difficulty personally expressing emotion in social spaces because I'm really afraid of judgment. There is the stereotype of women being crazy and emotional, and so if I express emotion, I'm afraid of getting painted as incompetent or unstable, and for that reason I bottle a lot of things up, or I manage them to a higher level because I, again, don't want to be judged. So I think for women, if they hear reflected back to themselves the inner narrative that you gave her, right? Yeah. She's like, okay, he actually understands my experience. he's not going to judge me because he painted me as a rational person. It's a rational response to the circumstance. But I think that's the product of it, right? In so many places, emotions painted as this thing that is crazy and unstable and very feminine and whatever it is, right? And like, I hate this so much because I'm not crazy and I'm not this. I'm allowed to be sad or frustrated or like exuberant, whatever it is. I can have these emotions and I want to be free with them, but then you think suddenly I'm untrustworthy because I have them. But you're untrustworthy because you're hiding them.
No, this feels very rich to me because I feel like this is one of the places where there's a lot of potential gain in understanding the way other people's minds are, and also the way that our own minds are that may be less obvious to us. So it seems like the politically correct thing is to believe that basically the minds of men and women are not different. Mm-hmm. But the problem with that is that because most of the sort of realms of our culture that everyone's trying to move into were initially created for and dominated by men, we've somehow adopted the frame that the male base characteristic is correct.
Sure.
And so when we say women are exactly the same as men, what we're actually saying is we expect women to be exactly like men. Right. And if that's not the case, then all of a sudden we're not respecting the value that those differences offer. Totally. Or giving or creating a space that's actually welcoming. Mm-hmm. It's actually valuable. So that's really interesting. I'd really like to get your experience on that. I also wanted to say something that I think is really important, which is that I think it's really useful for men to learn from women about emotions, because I think because emotion tends to be a little bit more on the surface for women, they tend to develop emotional literacy more easily.
Yeah, absolutely. Social emotional literacy, absolutely. Well, I think I can't speak to biology. It's not my background, right? But I can speak to like an examination of culture and society. I think women and men are just raised differently to be like, you know, how a mother might treat her son versus her daughter in terms of giving her permission to have emotions, right? So I wonder even if it's just a cultural upbringing that's so deeply embedded in society that, you know, women aren't able to have intimate personal relationships with lots of people, whereas men less so.
Yeah. I feel like I can speak to that because I grew up in a hippie community, so like there was a very strong desire to kind of make sure that emotion was open to everybody. And I would say I ended up like very hyper masculine despite that. Yeah. And then I actually feel like a lot of cultural pressure growing up in a liberal, left wing kind of West Coast environment to be more emotional and more sensitive, and it's like kind of like it's hard to just be male.
Oh, what a tough life. I'm not. There are definitely aspects for being both genders. I don't want to in any way suggest that I'm diminishing the male experience.
So, and then what we do know is that on average, the gaps between personality characteristics are largest in the countries that have gone the furthest towards gender equality. So if we look at Sweden, we'll find that like the difference in risk taking between men and women is higher than in the other. In say Iran, where they have much more strict gender roles. So certainly there's both of these elements, but wherever they arise from, if you're working with people who have a different sort of type of mind, and they're trying to we're trying to make the experience as valuable for the people who come into the community as possible.
Sure, absolutely.
And make it as welcoming as possible. Having a way of understanding those differences and permission to be the type of person you are and respect for those differences, those all seem like fundamental to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a degree of emotional intelligence, right? This is something that you, like, schools don't teach it because it's really a complex thing to teach someone emotional intelligence or social intelligence or charisma even, like these ideas of how to be socially adept. I think from my experience as a woman, I've had a lot of opportunity to experiment with my interactions with people and try on different personas and different responses and different scripts within my community, because as a woman I have a lot more permission to have, I guess, like social blunders. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but like I can blunder through something with the opposite sex, and I pretty much don't get any judgment for it a lot of times. And I'm curious if that might be a contributor, but I think the biggest thing is, again, learning about emotional intelligence, building empathy, and a lot of this can just be exposure to different types of people, working with different types of people. I think your approach of asking questions and being present to someone's distinctly different experience of the same, and not passing judgment. I think creating space like where that has a lot of permission and doesn't have any judgment. We all talk about everyone finding their own path, and everyone has their own movement, but that's not often coming through in our language and in our like socialization with other groups. You see people who only hang out with other people who move like really, really well, and not affiliate with or not talk with or create relationships with people who are beginning or new, which has a suggestion of hierarchy there in terms of value as a person. But even like again in the language, I remember something I called someone out on recently was like, she said, "Oh, I couldn't even." I remember back when I started, I couldn't even do a Kong, which is like a volley, whatever. And I was like, now you're replacing it. That's a value statement inherently saying like if you can't do a Kong, like you're shitty and that's this and that. And like it's just like there are plenty of people who do parkour, especially as we start to reach older and older populations, who will never do a Kong, and they will do parkour and they will have value in our community. We have to be very cognizant of how the kind of subtext of our language is going to impact our students and our fellow practitioners. I think that's where a lot of it comes in. Maybe women are a little more tuned into that subtext because we have to constantly be seeking it out. I mean, I find that I'm constantly looking for people's subtext in their language and their communication with me. But how are you judging me with what you're saying right now?
Yeah, interesting. So I don't want to kind of silo you into being the person who talks about
talking about
gender.
Women, it's okay, right? I'm a woman, I guess. All I have to offer is value.
So I wanted to just kind of to leave that topic for the moment.
Sure, yeah.
And go into one of your big interests has been play and play theory, which is something that we share.
Yeah.
And you crafted a kind of very specific approach to teaching outdoor parkour classes to, from what I understand, a very diverse population, right?
Yeah.
People of different kind of ethnic groups, people of different ages, people of different ability levels. And I wanted to hear you talk about kind of how you use play as a way to kind of, your understanding of play as a way to make parkour that much more approachable for people and more effective for their training.
Sure. So I've taught this once or twice with a few people, and the two models I have right now are, like, there are two approaches to teaching right now that I think parkour, it's performance-oriented and play-oriented. So performance-oriented is a class where you might go to, and it's achieving how to do this skill correctly, improve your physical fitness in terms of, like, I can do one more push-up that I did last time. So very much about physical goals and techniques and your personal experience, intrinsic, that's not the word really, but inward-looking experience about you, right? Versus play being about us and the we, and a social experience and about having fun, where the metric of success is laughter and, whether or not you walk away and you call that person up to hang out again, and looking at whether or not you're trying to train athletes or you're trying to build a community. I'm not saying they can't overlap, but that there is a difference in approach, and that what you might integrate here is very different than what you might do here. So, like, instead of using drills, I'm going to find a game. Instead of doing, like, a regimented warm-up, we're going to do, like, some sort of activity where you're partnering up and talking to someone else and solving a problem or a puzzle. But basically, a lot of things I did with the movement creative was very much about looking at, we had lots of talks about how do we essentially gamify or playify our classes from, like, start to end. And while there might be individualized practice, there's maybe a group goal. So we're all going to do 1,000 jumps together, and you're going to tally them all. But we're all working this collective goal while still working on our individual thing, and just contextualizing every activity within the group or within the community. And it's never just about, now you're going to go work on your jump over there instead of whatever it is. So we're working on this together somehow.
So can you give us, so how do you feel like that that impacted the experience of the student,
Mm-hmm.
the progression of the student, and then the kind of like the business aspect of being able to retain students.
Sure. Okay. I need to write this down.
So 3 questions.
Yeah.
A play-based versus a performance-based approach. How does that affect like the long-term kind of? Well, how does it affect the experience of the student first?
Sure.
Second, how does it affect their progression in the art? And then third, like as a business person, what will this do for someone trying to put on their classes?
I think so. I think when you go more towards the play space, the play approach is there's more of an attention to the social emotional experience of the individual.
Yeah.
So that's why you're able to bring in so many diversely different people together, because you're able to set aside a lot of their hesitations. And so I'm very interested in studying new students, the new student experience, and why people do or do not come back. In parkour, and this ties into the answer to all 3 of those questions, especially businesses. A new person coming into parkour, parkour is very scary. From the outside, it looks like this is a crazy thing. So you already get to class, and on top of that, if you're told to do all these crazy things in front of other people, even just crawling around, maneuvers that you're not doing in your day-to-day life, right? So you're outside your comfort zone. And if you can lower the social risk of participating, people are more willing to engage. It frees up bandwidth to engage physically.
Yeah.
So I think that's one benefit in terms of like being able to advance your own movement, is that when you're in a more socially positive and lower risk space, you're more willing to engage with physical risk because the social risk is less.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of like, the client experience is very much more about becoming friends with the people you're working with. And hopefully creating a space where they're going to train outside of your class time, and become more committed to what they're doing, and then again stay longer with the community and the group. So the business is not a business; it's a community. Yeah. It's a business and a community. Mm-hmm. Versus a performance class is about achievement of skills. So once you achieve the skill, what happens? So this is what I used to say, critique gyms on, is you have a level system: level 1, level 2, level 3. Okay, what happens when I get to level 3? I guess I'm done. I go find something new. I find the next new thing.
Yeah.
Versus a community, there's no leveling out, right? Mm-hmm. There's just a new way, something new every week that your coach brings, a new experience, a new game, and you're there because of the people, not just because you're trying to achieve the black belt. And not that that's the only thing that keeps people, but there's like a difference again in mentality and approach.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I want to dig into there.
And I know there's so many, and then there's just it's really hard to even talk about something. It's kind of like trail away to all the things I want to say, and it's hard on the spot.
So. This reminds me, and I've told this story a few times, of a conversation I had with Brandy, who's the head coach or one of the coaches at Parkour Visions. I was very much a performance-oriented coach. I came from gymnastics, right? And then my theory was basically, if I create the most effective progressions for students, then they will continue to come back because they'll get better, and getting better is fun. Yeah. And that worked very well for young male talented students. But I didn't have as good of I didn't tend to, like, my retention rates for higher level classes were extremely high. My retention rates for lower level classes were not that great.
Have we, just to interrupt, and I hope this doesn't derail you, in that book, Play, by Stuart Brown, he references a Runner's World article, which I've never been able to find, about the 4 types of players: the enthusiast, the socializer, the competitor, and the athlete, or the exerciser. Yeah. I think this is what this is really getting at, and I look at it's also like player. There's a word for it in when you look at marketing and segmentation, but he basically breaks it to this. But this is such a good way to look at people who do parkour. Yeah. And of those 4 types, I think the smallest group is the competitor. People who are doing this purely because they need to compete. If there was no competition, they would not be there. Yeah. And I think that, there's so much I could say in the context. So you have the 4 types, right? Performance-based models really speak to exercisers and competitors. Yeah. But the problem is that exercisers eventually achieve their goals and they leave. And competitors need to keep finding more people to compete with or keep upping the level of whatever, and again, if people are leaving, they're not staying to get better, and it's a smaller and smaller and smaller niche group to be a part of. It's also more elitist, less inclusive, And then socializers and enthusiast people who do it because they want to. They would not do it if they did not have a social experience. Or they would not do it because they need to be doing this thing.
Yeah.
They do it out of the love of doing it. So that's very much.
You call that enthusiasm?
Enthusiast,
yeah.
yeah.
Enthusiast.
You do it because you love doing it under
Yeah.
any context. But as long as you're doing the thing, you don't care how you're doing it.
Yeah.
I think that's like what play-based models or community-based models and really strong business models, things that I think are really sustainable for talking about businesses that talking to clients. You want to build a business that's very much on the socializer end and the enthusiast end, because those people create communities, they stay together, they grow. It's less exclusive, and these two other groups can exist within that. But I find that socializers and enthusiasts have a lot more difficulty coming into like performance based, where you're appealing to exercisers and competitors, because what they need is harder to satisfy than vice versa.
It's interesting. I think that's a really nice schema to think about some of these things, and the idea of emphasizing that social and enthusiastic aspect of it is really powerful. I think that I'm curious if these are really in conflict. I look at something like CrossFit, and CrossFit has grown so explosively.
Yeah, exactly.
And what it seems like to me that CrossFit has done really well is it has a community aspect, because everybody does it at the same time together. And this is a huge sort of benefit that you don't get from going to Gold's Gym. And then there's this weird thing that happens where suffering together
totally.
is bonding, and people like that bond.
We'll get to the military.
The suffer fast, right? And then the last thing is the competition. And one of the things that I've found really interesting in my own work is that I find that almost everybody really enjoys competition.
Yeah.
Provided that they have
30% chance of winning.
Provided that they feel safe and have a sufficient chance of success.
Yeah, totally.
Right. It's like competition is great as long as I'm not going to lose every damn time.
Actually, I think CrossFit is really interesting to look at, and a good comparison and a question as to why can't parkour follow that model, for example, because why can't we create a space that's more about competition and challenge, but still be inclusive? And honestly, the only thing that always comes up for me constantly is the price point. To participate in CrossFit, you have to have a lot of money a lot of times, so gyms are very expensive. But that being said, like, also classes are very small, so keep classes size. Like, from my experience, I did CrossFit a little bit. I never had a class exceeding 8 people.
Really?
I got to know my class, and we always had the same training day, and I can see totally. And there's a culture of cheering each other on, and very similar to parkour. But I wonder if it's a price point difference, and also, again, parkour is so niche. It's still like you're lifting weights, and this looks like exercise. This does not necessarily. And there's you have to even appeal to a larger group of people because.
Yeah, I mean, CrossFit's just closer to what people expect.
Yeah,
right?
They're more willing to engage.
Yeah.
Lower threshold of.
Everyone knows they need exercise, and CrossFit's a form of exercise, whereas parkour is a way to get exercise, but that's But
this also doesn't feel like exercise. I don't know if this is also something I talk about a lot with newcomers too. Is they love this sport, but they don't feel like they're extra. They don't like. I leave a Soul Cycle class and I'm fucking This is why, by the way, I think Soul Cycle is like a raging, like explosive brand, because you leave the class feeling like you really worked. Whether or not you did, you're dripping sweat. That place was hot. You did your thing. Same thing with CrossFit. You feel like you did something because like you probably sweat a lot. You're lifting these heavy weights. But in parkour, you might spend all class working on one jump. And like maybe achieve it 2 or 3 times, and maybe you don't break a sweat, because it's parkour to me is so much more about the emotional and social training than it is about the physical. The physical is a means to the social emotional like development, the experiencing fear and becoming adept at working through intense emotion under strenuous circumstances, right? Like you don't get that in CrossFit so much. You don't get that in other sports. Like there's such a it's so much less about the physical and more about this other aspect. Which is also why I think parkour can't necessarily, should be looking towards socialized enthusiasts, because competitors and exercisers could have a lot more difficulty tapping into the inherent value of what parkour brings, because it takes long to make the connection of the physical to their immediate goals.
Yeah, there's I tell people sometimes who are starting my stuff that it's going to take a little while before you're going to be able to actually work out with it.
Yeah.
Because the technical demands are so hard initially that you can't access those kind of like higher threshold metabolic states and muscular states, because you just don't know what you're doing with your body, so you can't push your body hard. So you're more limited by that. And
people are, what is it called? Immediate gratification. Is that what it is? Yeah. They're short-term thinking. So if they're not feeling it, they're getting the results. And a lot of times, why do people seek out new exercise regimes, new movement programs? They have either some sort of like fitness goal they're trying to achieve, or they're looking for a community, but usually it's fitness goal, right? I want to get more active. This would find me to get more active. And if you're not helping me be more active, or I don't feel like I'm getting my goals accomplished, so. Yeah,
our model is sort of, it's all about exercise right now. That's what movement's about. People, I mean, there's some very strange things about our kind of like world model around what movement is. I mean,
the understanding of what movement is.
Yeah, the best example of it is that there was I think it was a Planet Fitness in Hollywood that had an escalator that led to the cardio room. So people don't even recognize that like the movement that you get going up and down stairs contributes to your overall exercise profile. Because we've conceptualized it into this little box, the thing that I do for 45 minutes at the gym.
Yeah, exactly.
Or an hour at the gym. And so Crossfit has an advantage over parkour in that it looks more like what people expect it to look like.
Parkour is about emotional and social fitness as much as physical fitness. And I advocate for people trying parkour because it creates a space that's slightly suspended from reality, right? There's no real repercussion to take risk in this space aside from the physical. I mean, there's the physical repercussion, but I mean, you know, in your day-to-day life, for example, you can't take a risk at your job or in your relationship a lot of times because there are big repercussions. And it's hard sometimes to even work through your emotions around a risk that you might need to take because you're not used to doing, you're not adept to doing, you don't have any practice. And so what parkour does is it provides you a easily accessible, regular space to practice your ability to interface with your emotions, to assess risk, understand the variables and the factors, and make a decision. You know, you're learning to assess whether or not it is an acceptable or unacceptable risk to take. And you get better at the things you practice. So to me, parkour is really this deep practice of understanding yourself through physical challenge. It's a lesson that you can take as you get better here. It will start showing up in other areas of your life. You know, I really do like to credit many ways my practice of parkour giving me the ability to leave my career in architecture, pick up and move across country, and, you know, join an organization that wasn't doing so well to try to turn it around. And, you know, these are huge risks that I think in my life, had I not had my experiences through parkour, my practice in parkour, and the regular interface and experience with risk and fear and anxiety and having to take action while experiencing those, that to me is, you don't get that from CrossFit, you don't get that from soccer. It's, you know, this is on me to make a decision about myself and understand my circumstances and
the courage to take a leap, as it were. You know, metaphorically,
the skill. I mean, it's risk. Navigating risk is a skill, and people think it's like, oh, this person just is an adrenaline junkie, or this, you know, they just whatever. But it's just like, no, like I practice taking risk like every day, in fact, and that's why I'm good at it. That's why when it matters in my life, I can do it. I can do it well, or I can do it without too many repercussions or general accuracy of expected outcome, because I know how to like calm my emotions, be present to what I need to do, assess the circumstance, assess myself, and make the best decision for myself. Whether it is to take the jump or to walk away today, to move across the country, not to stay with my partner, to leave him, whatever it is. That's a have kids, not have kids. I don't know. What else are big risks in our lives? Like
I like to think of movement practice as a laboratory for character.
Yeah.
And I practice, you know, weightlifting, I practice parkour, I practice martial arts. And the thing that I think that parkour kind of uniquely offers is an ability to kind of like really take a microscope to your experience of fear.
Yeah.
Right? You experience fear in martial arts, but you don't have time to study it really. Like it's happening and you're reacting, and there's something really valuable to that. Like I have an enormous respect for people who get in the ring. You know, I did my first jiu-jitsu competition recently. It was a really interesting thing. But when I look at a jump that's 20 feet up, and and I have to kind of like go through a process, I get to it's higher resolution. That's one way of thinking about it. I can get a higher resolution picture of what my emotional response to these things is,
totally.
and how I tweak that and become a person who can overcome that and who can
exactly.
face down the fear.
Well, I think so. Everyone, if you feel stress is a fear response.
Yeah.
You're stressed to meet a deadline because you're afraid of not meeting the deadline. So I think recognizing people sometimes don't realize how much fear they face every day. So much of human experience is fear. Fear of going outside, fear of the weather, fear of getting wet when you're like going to work. Even on a micro level and a macro level, right? Like we experience a wide spectrum of fear, and it manifests in different ways. And we are given very few opportunities in any area of our life to practice our fear response. And it's sometimes hard to sell the practice of parkour as the practice of like risk management or fear tolerance. That's what I was saying. Like it's parkour to me is less of a physical practice and more of an emotional, social one. So that was always why for me I was like, it doesn't really matter what the actual movements are. It's that you're putting yourself in front of challenges that scare you on a regular basis, and then being present to your emotional experience, because the physical is one element of it, but you can get the physical anywhere. That's not what makes parkour special. It's not why you should try and give parkour a go. You should give parkour a go because of this other layer.
I think that the emotional and social component of movement practice, whatever the movement practice is really primary. And I think parkour is really powerful because it's a very becomes very obvious within that, right?
Yeah. It's very easy to see and immediately access.
You can be great at something from an external perspective, and if it doesn't mean anything to you internally, what's the value of it?
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas if you are profoundly happy from the value of your physical practice, does it matter if you win the gold medal or not?
Yeah.
Like what's really the thing that's going to sustain you over the long term in your life?
Sure.
Like that's fundamentally, I think, the most important question people should be looking at in their physical practice. And when people, there's an idea that I wanted to bring up that came from Georges Chabert, which is we should measure people in their practice not by by how high their achievement is, but by the gap between where they begin and where they can end.
I like that a lot.
And so people often, will see stuff that I can do and say, oh, I can never achieve that.
Yeah.
And I think, well, that's not the point, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like, you may do a jump that like maybe you feel like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not doing the jump the way that I should. But if that jump has a profound meaning for you and carries you through other things in your life, then it's more valuable than the guy next to you who jumped 5 feet further and the jump didn't mean anything to him.
That's hard to the thing is, it's really hard to communicate because American society, and again, I can really only speak deeply to American society, very externally, everyone's very much seeking out external validation all the time.
Yeah.
We're driven by external validation. We're grown up in, we grow up in school where other people are evaluating us and tell us what our worth is all the time through tests and exams, right? And, I used to talk about my experience as a kid. It was extremely competitive, from my schoolwork to even community service. Who could have the best gold award project as a Girl Scout, right? It's this absurdity of competition that infiltrates every aspect of your life, and you're constantly comparing yourself to other people. And even as you grow older, so many people in their communities are competing to who gets married first, who has the biggest house, who has the best paying job. It's constantly looking at other people to value yourself. And I think it's really foreign when you get into spaces, and something I talk about retaining new students is you have to teach them how to create internal systems of validation, which means you have to probably start with some external validation. So this is something parkour shows with, you need to have some ways that people can externally validate their experience while developing their skills of internal validation so that they can appreciate the practice. Because otherwise they're going to keep looking at, I'm doing parkour to be better than this person, or I'm doing parkour to look cool, or I'm doing parkour because, until you give them a way to validate or understand or appreciate their experience for what it is, give them an actual system or a tool or a way, they're not going to.
Cool. So this segues into two topics I really wanted to get into with you. One was, so we talked a lot about that parkour teaches you things that you can get out of the rest of your life. That will help improve you in the rest of your life. This has been a key sort of talking point of parkour since the very beginning. And it really, it's like you go to a Taekwondo school and they'll say the same thing. It's all the inner game of everything is the point. But I think that there's a trap that can happen where people can overcome fear in this place and feel like that's enough.
Yeah.
And then avoid everything else. It's like, yeah, I'm still scared to approach girls. Yeah, I'm still scared to talk to my boss. But hey, I'm fearless at jumping off things, and that's enough for me. How do you in your practice and in working with people avoid that trap?
So one thing I used to do in my class when I used to teach, it's been a long time since I taught. I teach like from time to time workshops, but I let my coaches teach a lot now. I really like giving students homework and like takeaway, but relevant to their life. So like, okay, like I want you to go and find a way to take a risk in a friendship. Like, so what's something you're scared about doing with one of your friends right now? Something you're not communicating or afraid to say or maybe afraid to do. Like this week, reflect on that. Like take time to meditate. I think again, having that secondary practice that's not physical that accompanies your physical practice. Take time, meditate on this, and then do it. Like take a risk and fix a relationship. Reach out to someone. Communicate something that's making you uncomfortable. But I try to, as a coach, I feel it's my responsibility to help people make the bridge to taking lessons from my practice into their real life. Yeah. And even myself, I have to remind myself sometimes, like, okay, this is just a challenge. How can I break it down into progressions? Like, if I wanna make X amount of money, okay, this is an impossible challenge, but it becomes less possible now because I can say, okay, I can start here and do these 10 things. I know how to break a challenge down. I'm not gonna, if I feel overwhelmed here, I can create steps to get me there and understand my challenge, my emotions and experience. But I have to have someone raise my consciousness to that level, like raise my attention to, oh, like this is how I can use it here. Like I learned how to use math, but like I learned to do math, but until someone shows me like this is where you might apply it, like application, like tool and application, right? Like teach people how to apply it to their daily life through like I said homework, but that's one
sure. Yeah, I like I think there's always the question of how well benefits in one activity will transfer to something else. And I think that one of the key lessons is you just have to be intentional.
Yeah.
You have to pay attention to am I doing that? Okay, theoretically parkour makes me courageous in the rest of my life, and I actually acting that out and actually trying to apply the same mindsets in my life that I apply in the parkour.
Am I taking my practice off the field and into reality?
Yeah, so then the other aspect of that was you talked about this idea of people come in our culture highly kind of driven by external motivators. External motivators are what we're conditioned to kind of build our behavior off of from a very early age.
Absolutely.
And then ideally perhaps the idea is that parkour should be something that's driven by internal motivation, and then it's one of those places where you can be driven by internal motivation. You can learn about your internal motivations. But then there's the problem of the segue, right? Like if someone comes in and they're expecting somebody to say, measure their waist every 6 weeks and give them a gold star and do whatever they would do with a personal trainer or a CrossFit. Do they make the high board? Do they do all that stuff? How do you teach people to learn to become more in tune with that intrinsic motivation system?
Sure.
And particularly, I find this interesting because it feels like there's a huge culture gap between the people who start parkour on their own and the people who have a teacher, because now you have an external source of validation. Yeah. So how do you teach the culture of the early adopters, the self-starters in parkour? How do you get that to the people who come in from a more traditional sort of background and expectation?
So I don't know if I have like a one fit. Well, one size fits all solution, right? But like one thing I think of immediately is, it's really important to help people develop their solo practice, their independent practice, their personal practice. So much. I mean, school reflects this too. When you work with a mentor, it's you have your session with your mentor, but then you take and you have homework. You have things you take home that you work on your own time. You develop your personal practice. I think it's through personal practice that we begin to understand and develop our own intrinsic motivators, our measurements for success. as a coach, again, I think it's important that through that transition space, you provide a mix of discussion and dialogue around building these internal motivating forces, but also at the same time providing a framework and a way for people to interface with what they already know, to retain them long enough to learn the longer lesson.
Yeah.
You know, whether that's like, you know, I think maybe that's why karate works sometimes so well, because there's so many belts. And then now even more so with a lot of the places, like they have like little bands you get in your belts, which are even more like much more like about improving retention, letting people stay long enough so they can learn the lessons that take a long time to learn.
Yeah.
Because you can't communicate and teach it right overnight. And I actually think that like society and being conditioned to rely on external motivators is a huge source of like depression and anxiety for a lot of people, and as they try to transition through, like I think like the midlife crisis or the quarter life crisis is very much this like coming to like butt against like what your parents wanted for you or what you thought society wanted for you, and then what you want for yourself, and trying to reconcile that somehow. Like even I felt that was like, okay, I'm leaving my job, I'm leaving architecture, like am I suddenly a failure now that I don't have like a super well paying job, and I'm going back to living with roommates, and I'm, you know, like something, I'm changing my life upside down to a thing that I really care about. I know what I love. I can see what I'm passionate about. I'm really excited to do it. But the things I have to change is what I've been told I need to do to be successful.
Yeah.
And that terrifies me. And I was so depressed in the period between going from what others wanted for me to what I want for myself. And what I want for myself is completely valid and will make me happy. And this won't. And that's like that's everyone in their life will have to eventually shift from external to internal. I mean, especially if they find that they find something they're very passionate about, it'll probably like come into conflict with some of your social conditioning and some of the needs and wants from other people. And
yeah, that's there's this idea of individuation, or the development of the self, right? We were talking before we got on camera about Joseph Campbell and Jordan Peterson. Peterson talks about Pinocchio as this great archetypal story because you can imagine that everyone starts as a sort of marionette. That's where the strings are being pulled by culture.
Yeah.
Which in
no, I love this. I already know where you're going. I love it. I'm really excited about it. Keep going.
So Pinocchio, let's say that his strings are being pulled by culture, which is represented positively by Geppetto, and negatively by the coachman. Right? There's the tyrannical and the positive aspect of culture, and those are the strings that are pulling it. And then the other aspect of it is nature, which is represented by the blue fairy, and then maybe by the whale. And those are the other things that are pulling his strings.
Yeah.
And it's only through kind of experiencing all these things, and then going into the belly of the whale and saving his father, that he's able to become an individuated self, something that doesn't have strings anymore, that can be self-guiding. And I'm right in the middle of Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning book, where he's talking about how we have to first sort of identify with a group, and this is what happens in like like an initiation ritual in a traditional culture, and it's only once we have that, like I am a parkour athlete, I am an architect, I am this, I am this.
My title, here's my title, I'm a tresseur. I'm not a.
Yeah, it's only once we've got that we can start kind of letting it go and individuating out and creating our own personal identity.
That's something actually they taught me in architecture school very early on. Is they used to say when I was a freshman, you learn the rules of design. And then you can break them.
Exactly.
But how can you break rules until you know what the rules are and you understand them and are confident using them? Because then what you're doing is just chaos and it won't be meaningful to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, totally. I think you have to grow up. And it's not. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I wish there was a better tool for us as people. Even like outside, just talking about like aside even from movement, just as people, for us to be able to take the step away from what we've been told we want and into what we have found that we want for ourselves.
Yeah.
I think. You know, depression is so widespread, and so many people struggle in their late 20s and undergo these, like, they're not saying like what the quarter life this person.
Yeah.
That's such a product of so many more people now having access to other communities, access to like the online network has really helped. I think speed up the midlife crisis to be much more sooner because of our ability to engage in a conversation with so many more diverse people, that we become aware of all these other opportunities, all these other ways of being, and we're suddenly like, okay, like. This person's happy, and I was told that this was going to make someone happy. Like I dated someone who didn't graduate high school, and I remember when I first met him, just like, this isn't gonna work, like, and then realizing like he was happy doing these things, I was like, okay, like you can be successful and not go to high school and be really smart and do all these things, and I have this like this built up understanding of what success is, and I think that that's really what you're embedded with what an idea of success is instead of creating your own success, but helps you get to a certain point. I think the college system fucks us up because like. Yeah. You get too far along on your path, you've dumped a ton of money. It's even harder now. Like, we're creating a thing, it's even harder to change to do what we want after you've dumped $250,000 into our education.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the education's, the collegiate system, the idea that everyone should go to college is a really bad idea. And, man, the research shows that most people know absolutely nothing from their college experience. Like, most people can't answer any more general knowledge questions after 4 years of college education. So we spend an enormous amount of money on this, and then for almost any job, unless you're like pre-med or something like that,
they're gonna train you.
You don't. Everything you learn is irrelevant.
You're probably useless. That's what I told people when I hired them. Like, you're probably useless. I'm gonna train you.
Yeah. So, whatever. That's a we can go. That's a totally different tangent. But it is relevant in a way because we're talking about how does the person educate themselves and become
exactly.
heroic.
It is on a micro scale, the macro thing we undergo. Like we're trying to teach people how to build systems, and that's why I think also a lot of people who do parkour and find movement undergo within a short period of time a lot of like deep personal change because the process of building a practice of self-awareness, questioning yourself all the time, questioning your surroundings, identifying why you're doing things, you get better at what you practice. So I do find a lot of people in parkour and in movement in general tend to be very rapidly moving towards, they very quickly come to heads with their life. Yeah. And I find a lot of people like try to find more and more ways to understand how their conditioned life fits in with their movement practice, and then questioning. A lot of people go through crises of person when in movement, I think.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's a sort of a catalyst for character change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Something comes that is very different and outside of your experience, and it shifts your internal emotional life in a really profound way, and it makes you see everything in your life differently. So there's two kind of places that I wanted to go with you with that. I think we should kind of like table for a second the hero's journey idea.
Yeah. There's so much that could just be its own evening.
There was. I was listening to your interview with Matt Myers from the 3 Foot Guy podcast, and you talked about not liking the game add-on for beginners.
I love the game add-on. First of all,
but for beginners,
not for beginners, yes.
And it tied into something we were talking about there, which is that too much freedom is overwhelming initially, and so if you're constructing games and you want people to be able to play effectively, then you have to be able to give them sufficient constraints for them to be able to start to map out the game in order to start playing. Yeah. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about how you set up the constraints of your games, and then maybe some of your favorite games to get people started moving in parkour.
Yeah. Okay, so I think, to go back, we talk about newcomers, so I think a lot about the new person experience as well, especially because a lot of my events are about attracting newcomers. The women's gathering, my women's meetups, beginner jams, these are the places I get to teach a lot now, so I'm always thinking about what they experience on an emotional spectrum, and the context which I really got interested in games was under this idea of social risk. Everything you do in your life has some degree of social risk. And for newcomers, you want their first experience to has as little negative emotion as possible, so that they will affiliate positivity with movement. They'll come back, they'll stay. So I don't like add-on. I love add-on, but I don't like add-on because for newcomers, because you have no skills or tools to use to participate in this game. So add-ons, one person starts with a move, another person adds one on, another person adds one before you have a line of movements. Everyone's doing it. If you're a newcomer, your experience is this is incredibly social, high social risk. I would evaluate this high social risk game because now you have to put yourself out there. If you're with other people who have done this before, they know what they're doing, and you don't, and you're gonna look potentially like an idiot if you do something stupid. And I've seen so many newcomers that be like, deer in headlight. What do I do? How do I add on? I don't know. And that's a really negative experience. They're having high levels of anxiety. They might not come back because of this being put on the spot. This moment here. So I avoid games that put people on the spot to create. It wasn't like Edo Portal had like the 3. Is it imitation, integration,
it's,
and
isolation, integration, improvisation.
Okay. So perfect, exactly. I think that's very much tunes into like improvisation is very much what add-on is about. You improv, you're able to use or integrate, and you have to have things to work with. So I always look for games that are for newcomers. I look for games that are designed to lower social risk by introducing other people, but it doesn't require, and everyone's kind of on the same level doing the same thing necessarily. So. And a lot of them, they're not even like very much, they might not look like game plans. I do quadrupedal and I'll have people partner up and like we'll go eye to eye doing quadrupedal. Or I'll put a ball between our 2 heads and now we have to cue them back and forth holding the ball together. So the task is to hold the ball, not to do the movement.
Yeah.
So sometimes like I look for games that are less focused on skill execution and more focused on like a social experience with the group. If that makes sense. Another game I like is Steal the Bacon.
Steal the Bacon?
Yeah,
Tell
so you get like, you find a partner and then between you put like a something in between you, like a shoe or something, and then you walk apart. And might have 2 teams, right? Mm-hmm. And you have your partner. And then each round the master of the game basically says, okay, you're going to quadrupedal and go, forward quadrupedal. You have to race to grab the thing in the middle and bring it back to your side before the other person does. And if the other person gets it, you try to tag them. Mm-hmm. So it's all about, again, it's not about the movement, it's about getting this thing and bringing it back. So I'm changing your focus so that, like, again, people become when you're doing new things with your body, people become hyper aware of their body. One thing I get a lot from feedback from women, for example, this is my experience too as a woman, the first time I did quadrupedal, I was really uncomfortable because it's a sexualized position in society, mm-hmm. and I was like, I don't want to be crawling around a bunch of men doing this. This is like... But it's fine, and you realize it's fine in the community culture we're in. Yeah. But like so many people have that experience the first time they're crawling around. They're hyper cognizant of their body, and it's like if I can change where their focus is, they'll have a much better experience and less emotionally intense. They'll let them engage with others and.
Something I've been thinking a lot about recently is attentional focus and how we can kind of one of the most persistent problems that you see in kind of organizing someone's movement practice is that they're paying attention to the wrong things. Mm-hmm. So when the big problem that I notice is when we're trying to teach someone, mm-hmm. a lot of times we're interfacing with the external expression of their movement, and then we're giving them a verbal feedback about what that external expression looks like, and then asking them to control that. And then we're often using words that are kind of like well, first of all, like, and I was I had a huge problem with this, using very formal language, mm-hmm. right? I want you to squeeze your glutes. I want you to externally rotate your knees or whatever, externally rotate your hips. All that stuff it's not common. It's not words that people use all the time, so it communicates with kind of a very small part of your brain. Mm-hmm. So now you get them to basically like have too much attention, and they get paralysis by analysis. They get stuck. Yeah. So what I like about those games you described right away is that you're getting you're avoiding a lot of hyper attention to the action of what's happening in the body itself, mm-hmm. by giving some external thing to pay attention to.
Yeah, exactly. Or someone else to pay attention to. I really. Partner games. I mean, I have the game website that I have all those games on. I need to get like better at putting all the games. I have so many on. I just have a starter set right now. But anything that you're working with someone else, or again you're working towards some goal that's not technically oriented, is great for newcomers. I always tell people also avoid games and activities that demand physical performance. So if you have to shimmy across this wall mm-hmm. here, I assure you. There'll be a time you use that and someone's going to be very unhappy and like that because you're not giving an alternative, or you're requiring them to do this, performing to some level. So think about progression within your activities as well.
And I like your model of like controlling social risk. So and then also I think that idea of like where is the focus is a really key thing to think about, and how you're designing the game. One of the things that I classically see within the parkour community is like you pick a series of movements, and it's a difficult series of movements, and then you look at it and you try to control everything in your head. Yeah. And you get the people who get stuck there. Yeah. They get stuck in the paralysis by analysis, and then you see them run up, and they're like, like all the weird run-ups. So I've been big on using games and kind of ways to trigger people into the movement, so they're not in that hyper analytical frame of mind before they start moving, to try and get them to learn to control it in a kind of a subcognitive way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's a huge thing, and it's a different thing from the way I think maybe most of the parkour instruction is happening.
Yeah, well, I think it's very much, and even coming to PKV, it's very still much about, and I can't speak too much to it, but you know, a lot of the places I've visited, it's about, okay, we're gonna learn how to jump today. We're gonna learn how to balance it. We're executing this movement, and that also goes back to like the 4 types of practitioners, right? You're appealing to athletes and to competitors and to exercisers, not to socializers and enthusiasts. And I think especially for newcomers, you want to create a more social experience for them because you want it to be, again, net positive.
Mm-hmm. So I have a couple last questions for you. Yeah. The last one I wanted to really get into is there's this sort of a theme within our conversation around the different types of motivation for practice, which is the enthusiast, the socializer, the exerciser, and the competitor.
Yeah, correct.
And you're kind of advocating that people focus more on the first two, and that maybe more of the
just on socializing, on the socializer, at least initially, or building your business and your practice and your brand. I mean, personally.
Yeah, and then, as we were talking about that, though, I was thinking about some of the other things we were talking about earlier about Jordan Peterson and Joseph Campbell and this idea of the hero's journey, and it seems to me that we're really storytelling creatures, and our motivations are often about how well it fits the story that we're trying to tell about ourselves. So if you want to have a practice that is persistent over time, how do you set up a story that continues to give you meaning? And then if you want to kind of keep bringing people back, how do you give them that story, that sense of continually kind of setting out on the journey and accomplishing something?
I have so many things I want to say. I don't know which one to start with. One is, first of all, I think when you're building a community, you need rituals. Less of a story, more of rituals. Spaces in which you come together and feel like meaningful connection to your community. You can't just show up to class. There has to be a time that's like special, that like acknowledges your role in your community. Or your progression in your community. Maybe that is like, and again, you can be done through challenge and competition. That becomes a ritual for your community, and that's like challenge nights. I like love challenge nights. Africa. You don't need to have a victor for challenge nights, because challenge nights can still be a form of competition, personalized competition within the larger context of community. But the second thing I want to say, and story conflicts a little bit with play, because play is theoretically without purpose, right? You engage with play because you love it. You do it because there's like, and I understand that we need motivation, but story is a form of motivation.
Narrative play is a huge portion of play.
Totally.
When you watch kids play, they're always telling a story. Like, kids rarely just jump because they want to jump. Yeah. Like, in their minds, they're jumping because they're running away from a tiger. Yeah. Right? And everything. So the aspect of the story, I don't think that is so motivating for adults. They're running away from a tiger, but there still has to be this sense of a narrative that's meaningful for people over time. I
think even socializers are still trying to become more adept movers. Become more physically fit. People come to, I think, again, universally people come to parkour because the external appearance of what parkour is this thing about physical fitness, right? So I think people bring that anyways, and it's a little less obvious. I think you have the 4 types of people who participate, 4 major motivators, and I think the strongest businesses, the strongest communities find ways to integrate all these needs in the experience. Yeah. I'm just saying, emphasize the social one, and you need to have rituals. You can have competition and this story of progression. And one thing I want to do with Parkour Visions is this thing like challenge coins, where each of our coaches will design a challenge, and they can like basically merit badges, and you can go out and earn all the merit badges from the different coaches, and they're rotating challenges. This is a way to benchmark progress or feel a sense of achievement without needing to be a part of like a hierarchy system. Yeah. So can you create moments of achievement and accomplishment without creating hierarchy? And that definitely works within a social environment that is positive, and also creates a sense of like, also doesn't undermine like creating a sense of equal value of each other. So like that's also something I try to balance out with competition. Is my worry with competition is it's return to hierarchy, and it naturally leads to like, I'm better than you. And then that makes it hard to empathize and connect, and leads into like I think more disparate, like more disconnected, disjointed communities versus one that's focused on how do you create a system for accomplishment, measuring accomplishment that doesn't create hierarchy.
Do you think there's a way to do that?
Sure, I mean, I think the challenge coins is my current solution to test, right? Like, I can't say like, here's the book on how to do it because everyone will be doing it. But I think that's like my idea. Like, I like the idea of merit badges. It's like pick and choose your flavor of what you're interested in. You're not showcasing anywhere, so you know you're progressing by achieving these things. But it's not about like saying I'm better than them or I have more badges than them. Amongst kids it might be, but
yeah, this is this is sort of a really interesting question for me personally right now because like I feel like I grew up in a community where hierarchy was like a bad word, and there was
me too. Well, I'll say that I still feel like the way it manifests is negative in a lot of places. When you have like hierarchical systems, like you need it in companies and businesses for things to run. I get it and the value of it, but I think a lot of times in communities I've seen it manifested very negatively where the leader becomes this thing you can't ever access. You have the really good athletes over here who never talk to the new athletes over here. And you have the group of weirdos who just do it because they're like doing it and like who knows who they are. And like, it leads like this clickiness of based on how well you can move. And
yeah. No, I totally understand that. I'm just thinking about this because I happen to be thinking about hierarchy in general right now. And the idea that one of the ideas that I've seen Jordan Peterson propose is basically positive motivation tends to be about movement towards a goal. So in order for there to be a goal, you have to value where you're going over where you are.
Sure, yeah.
And so there's always a hierarchy of value. There's always a valuation system.
Intrinsic or extrinsic.
And there's intrinsic versus extrinsic, so you always have to kind of have that, and you need it. You need to have. I mean, the idea of a heroic archetype is something that you are aimed at. It's something that you have to recognize that you don't currently yet manifest, so that you can be going in a direction that's meaningful to you. So it seems to me that hierarchy is necessary. But I agree with you that there's ways in which hierarchy kind of manifests itself, or that I've seen it manifest in the parkour community that become punishing, or in the martial arts community too, right? It's like if it's like you when you start a practice, it's like you get excited because you get better, right? And you move up the hierarchy. Yeah. And then there's going to come a point where it's like you kind of settle, or like I'm getting worse.
Well, we all will eventually.
Like
when we get old.
Yeah. I'm 36 years old, and like I'm getting better personally. Like I'm a better athlete than I was a year ago, or 4 years before that. But my relative rank as a parkour athlete is just going down and down and down because the pool of talented kids who've been doing it since they were 10 years old is just rising.
I think actually maybe the issue is when hierarchy gets conflated with value as terms of your value as a person in our community. When that's conflated with your value as your hierarchy in terms of your movement or your skill or what you like, theoretically in an organization, like we're all humans, deserve to be respected. There's a baseline like we all respect each other. We all try to accomplish the same goal. We all have the same whatever. But like I think in parkour a lot of times again, the people at the top get treated way, way differently than the people who are just starting, and then each like rung on the ladder, I don't know, like becomes very disconnected from the one above and below it. Like it's just, I just get a lot of
No, this is really interesting to me because like as you're telling me this, I'm thinking about a specific kind of leader in the parkour community who I interacted with, who's very anti-hierarchical, right? And I've seen a number of these people. And it felt like what weirdly happened was that it was like that anti-hierarchy became this aloofness that nobody was able to access, which just became its own weird cliquishness.
Because you're also making people wrong to some degree with saying,
and then of course if you were competitive, it was so looked down upon, and now you have this hierarchy of non-competitiveness. And it seems to me that like obviously there's going to be somebody who's the most skilled person in any given group. Can you cultivate a culture where the people who have the most skill have an ethic of giving back, of being representations, of understanding that they're inspiration. So rather than getting rid of the hierarchy and trying to ignore it, how do you set the hierarchy up so the hierarchy creates value for everybody throughout the pyramid.
Yeah, totally. I think maybe we were talking about two different things. Something about like my student motivators and like not creating hierarchy through student motivators, because I think it's outside of a context that's healthy sometimes.
Yeah.
But within a community, I'm a really big believer. Like, you need a leader in a community for a community to be healthy. Someone has to choose to step up and take responsibility and become the caretaker, or some group of people, right? Because someone has to make a decision. Someone has to set standards and be responsible. But I think it's really important as you have those forms of hierarchy, they make leadership accessible. Yeah. And like, there's a quote about how like great leaders create more leaders. Yeah. I really, really believe in this, and something that I try to strive wherever I work, whatever I do, is invest in and train and work with all the people of all the levels below me and above me to like further the community as a whole. Yeah. So I think that's really what it is. It's like if you're wherever you are in the piece of the hierarchy, being open to working with and experiencing everybody. Like when you go to a jam or an event, like don't just go hang out with the people that you see as like equal to you. Like, how can you find value training with and working with and interacting with someone it's their first day versus with someone who's working well beyond you? Like, I remember the first time I trained with Max Henry, he was like way beyond where I was in terms of, and just social comfort. I was like, and then he just much more skillful at the time, and really, it's funny, I've told him this, like, I didn't really like him when I first met him because we didn't interact at all, and he kind of ignored me, and then I wanted to interact with him, and I was just like, I have value as a person, like, play with me. And that's the thing, that's where I see hierarchy as a negative, is like when you just stay inside, like, if I'm not good enough or I'm not your level, you're not interacting with me. And that's, I think, where my hesitation has always been. But if we can cultivate a culture where people reach out and take responsibility for other people's experiences. You know, if you're in a community and you want a community, that means you also take responsibility for being a part of that community and the people in that community and how you show up and impact those people. So you want to be there, also try to interact with everyone with you, because they're trying to be a part of your community too. And
there's a friend of mine, Tom Wexler, who's a teacher. One of my students.
The archery.
Tom archery. A student went to his workshop recently, and someone was asking, "What did you learn from it?" And he said, one of my favorite things that he said was how to be at a jam. And he had a number of things.
Oh, I have so much to say on this, but yeah, go ahead.
But his number one thing was the jam is recognize that the jam isn't about you.
Yeah.
How do you contribute to the space of what's happening, rather than being focused on you?
Oh, so good. That's really, really good.
So how do you be at a jam? How should someone behave at a jam? What is the things that make that community grow in a positive way?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question, whenever someone comes out to jam, like, why are you here? Like, why would you train with this group of people instead of someone else? This is something that used to bother me as a woman. This may be an interesting way to connect the gender thing. Is my experience as a woman when I was training early on was I'd go out to a group of people, but no one wanted to interact with me because I wasn't training at their level. And this was a huge thing that put me off. And I've met a lot of women since then who come out to the women's gathering and have these emotional experiences where they're like, wow, this is what it means to actually train with someone. Yeah. And there's this idea of training with someone and training next to someone. Yeah. And I think so many women have these experiences of training next to the group. Like, we might all be working on this challenge. You're all doing the same thing, but I have to do a modification. I have to do it slightly different. Mm-hmm. And because of that, you're all treating me different to somebody. Or you're having this brotherhood, bro-y thing going on, and I don't get to partake in that emotional experience. And that's what I want. I want to be friends with you. Let me be your friend. Versus let me be something below you that you're pitying or something. I don't know what the right word is. But why do people go out and train with other people? It's because they want to connect with other people. And that's why I say of the 4 types, it's the socializer we want to appeal to, because parkour started out in jamming. We could have all just stayed on our own, trained our own, and been solo forever, see each other every now and then to compete, but we don't. We choose to get together and jam. We choose to be social. We choose to be a part of a community. So parkour is fundamentally social, and being at a jam means you have your friends and your buddies, but if someone new shows up or there's other groups there, you should be trying to make yourself available to their experiences, because also if you want to expand your movement practice, you need to try to consume as many perspectives as possible. My favorite thing to do at a jam is to go up to as many different people as possible and join in on their challenge. What are you working on? What are you working on? Can I do this with you? Because this is not something I would have created on my own. Yeah. Or together we can create something that I would never have been able to create on my own. And that's why you train with other people, is because it's going to allow you to explore another level of your movement or your ability.
See things in a different way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I find like my motivation personally for training other people is sort of twofold. One is like when I do something that I like, it's like I just want someone to share the experience. Like when you eat something tasty, you're like, try this brownie, it's amazing, right? I want that, and then also I want to I want to have something to emulate. I want to have there's an emotional resonance that happens when people are operating at a similar skill level and kind of like the same challenges.
Yeah, totally.
That all of a sudden you like connect.
Yeah.
And it's like you see
mutual
things
problem
and you
solving.
get
Absolutely.
and you get better faster.
Yeah.
And that's really motivational for me. The benefits are the sharing, and then the growth. I get better faster when I get to train with other people. I like those, and I feel like the parkour community started with like a very communist sort of ethic here, and it was all about giving and giving and giving.
Yeah, very
and
much.
then I was always at a jam for everybody else.
Yeah.
And then I was teaching for everybody else all the time, and I got to a point where I was just like I need to do this jump because I want to jump for me.
Well, this is why I really advocate for leadership. So this is why I say you have to have leaders. And whether the leadership changes from event to event or whatever it is, someone has to be there taking responsibility for the group. Like, someone has to come there and take responsibility for everyone's experience. It doesn't have to be everyone taking, but there has to be someone who says, like, okay, today I'll lead, and I'll make sure that everyone feels connected and involved. And then that enables you to, because I think what happens now is there's training sessions and there's jams and they become overlapped. Training sessions are where you're maybe with like mutually skilled people trying to focus and like progress your skill. Where jams to me have always been these things where like historically it was like get as many people as possible who do this thing so I can meet them and not be by myself anymore. It didn't really matter how good you are because there's not enough of us. And even on like national jams, they're still about getting lots of people together to meet each other. So I think like when the two overlap, you just need someone who is going to be the leader, who's going to say, I'm going to take responsibility today for everyone's experience. Yeah. You should all at some level be just aware of how you impact the group and what you're doing, your behaviors, and if you're really putting someone off, like be aware of that. Like that's also a reflection on the community. Yeah. But that's what leaders should do, is take responsibility for the group. And having several leaders, like with the women's jam, we're doing a monthly women's meetup in Seattle, and it's like there's 3 or 4 of us, and each time someone else is going to be assigned. Or we switch off, we hand off. Like the first half, I'm in charge. The second half, Cordelia's in charge. And when that swaps, like I can go off and do my own thing. I can go off and train my jumps and do my things, and she becomes responsible for the newcomers and their experiences and making sure people are connecting. And
Have you ever written an article about how to be at a jam?
I should. Actually, I have 2 articles right now I'm working on. So.
Okay. I don't want to use too much more of your time. I thought that was really cool, though. That last bit was really interesting, and I think that people will get a lot out of it, and it's grounds for more interesting conversations going forward. The last thing I wanted to ask you is just a kind of a random question. It's like it's a random close-up question, but it's particularly interesting because you come to my house and you get obsessed with my books.
Yeah.
So what are your...
No, don't ask me that book. Don't ask me that question. What you about to ask me? Don't ask me it.
5 most important books for movement practitioners.
Oh. That's terrible.
She's hiding her face.
It's like the worst question ever.
This is the worst question?
Yeah.
Why is it the worst question?
It's just like, there are things that I think people should read, not because they're related to movement, because it'll make you better at communicating, or it'll make you and that'll make you better at movement. Well, there are things like the Power of Myth, Joseph Campbell. Like I like this because I read it. I think about story in terms of people's stories and what they bring to when they show. Because all of my reading so much right now is about being a leader and helping other people connect with their movement and their bodies and relate that experience to the rest of their life. And so needing to understand their stories is really important, and how they create story. And I really like the book, obviously, Play by Stuart Brown. I think that's a really just entry level, like read it, get like a new perspective on what this thing could be. Can I just give you a list afterwards? Can I go home and think about it? I don't feel like I can come up with 5 books on the spot.
3 books. Just the first 3 books that come to mind. This is now a challenge for you.
Oh, God. I liked Deep Play by Diana Ackman.
Okay, that's good.
And, God, I really want a communication book. I really feel like, or something on social intelligence, but just nothing is coming to my mind right now. I've done so much reading on, like,
A book on social intelligence to be named later.
To be named later. I'm sorry.
We'll put it in the show notes.
This is like that. I knew, like, as soon as it says, like, this is a terrible question to ask me. I'm sorry. You should have told me beforehand. I could have come prepared.
Sorry.
But yeah, I can keep
conversations to be very organic. So.
But if it comes to me before you finish,
Okay, cool. Last question then.
I'll distance later.
So your Parkour Visions is your primary organization right now.
Oh, Love Where You Live. That's not really about movement practice. Love Where You Live by Peter Kageyama. Okay. It's about design and play in the physical world.
Okay,
and
cool.
Creating invitations for play. This was super informative to me, learning how to think about creating space, but also creating events and experiences for people that want to engage. So many people go through their lives, like, because we don't have a lot of movement in our everyday life outside of anything we choose optionally to engage in, and we're conditioned out of play. Like, quit playing around, grow up, cut it out. Yeah. Even if you were to put a playground in an office with adults, most people will not play on it because they need permission or an invitation to play. And invitation is all about invitation play. How do we create invitations for play to get people excited and do other things? And one thing I always reference in a lot of podcasts I've done, or other things I've done, not podcasts I've done, but is this story of the Mice on Main, which was this sculptural project where this kid put, like, these tiny little mice that are, like, kind of this big, in 12 different locations around Main Street in North Carolina. And they're, like, some are down low and some are up high, and when you go out, people, like, it's a big thing for the town now. They like, spent, like, $1,000 on this thing, but it's super, like big now, this whole line of, like, merchandise, whatever, but you go there and you go hunting for them. And what you see is, like, people, like, getting down low and squatting and looking up high, and, like, people are moving and they're invited to laugh and play just through this, like, little piece of paper that they're handed, like, hey, go find these mice. Yeah. Like, how do you invite people, and, like, how do you create the equivalent in parkour, any experience or any event that invites and give people permission to play who otherwise wouldn't? The onlooker to the event that, like, is curious, or, like, it's like, no, I haven't been, it's really fun to watch, but, like, I'm not athletic, here's my story. Like,
yeah, that's interesting. I think my wife would be really interested in that. She likes to toy bomb. She makes little vignettes with small toys and puts them out around the city.
I love it. Exactly. It's so great.
So play by Stuart Brown, deep play by Diane Ackerman.
Yeah.
And what was the last one?
Love Where You Live. Yeah, by Peter Kageyama.
Peter Kageyama. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Those are great recommendations.
You should hire me to advocate for his books.
Okay. And then the last question is, if people are looking to learn more about you and interact with your work more, where should they find you?
Cool. CaitlinPontrella.com.
There you go.
Maybe, yeah. I have lots up there. So.
And do you have any big events coming up that people should know about?
Yeah, I do. I have the North American Women's Gathering for women who are interested in parkour or general movement practice. That's going to happen in Vancouver this year, the last weekend of July. And the other one that I'm really excited about is the Art of Retreat, as we talked about earlier, which is leadership and education conference for parkour and its related practices. And it's a really cool weekend-long event. We're going to do it in a camp this year, cabins, and we have 16 talks across all elements of coaching practice and designing space and business operations and community development. So it's really cool. It's limited to 100 people, so you have to apply to attend, apply to speak, apply to teach. And we try to bring a diverse group of people in who can be peers to one another, have really productive conversations. The format for our talks are like, you have the presentation and then like 20, 30, 40 minutes plus to have a conversation with your tiny group around it. And it's just a really, again, it's my personal favorite event. It changes every year. It's also a huge social experiment of how to create an inclusive community, how to teach people how to communicate, and how to communicate with people with very different ideas with you. And that's also very good for our community. But it's I think if people come with open minds and with an intent to listen and learn, that it becomes a net positive experience, I hope.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. It's always a pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Evolve Move Play podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave a review on iTunes if you can. Finally, as we mentioned before the show, this is a listener-supported podcast, and if you want to have the most regular content, have the best guests on, and give you guys the best quality of audio and video, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Thank you very much, and I look forward to sharing more with you guys soon.